The first shard of glass hit the floor with a sound like a frozen tear. It was a sliver from the base of my mother's favorite Waterford crystal vase, the one that had sat on the mantelpiece for as long as I could remember. A cold, perfect monument to our family's impeccable taste. My hand, slick with nervous sweat, had slipped while I was dusting. The world slowed, the cacophony of pre-wedding chaos in my parents' house fading into a dull roar as I stared at the glittering evidence of my clumsiness. Alara? My mother's voice, a scalpel wrapped in silk, sliced through the hallway. She appeared in the doorway, a vision in a cream silk robe, her face a mask of carefully maintained composure that was beginning to crack at the edges. Her eyes, the same shade of hazel as my own, dropped to the floor. The silence that followed was heavier, more damning than any shout. That was my grandmother's. "I'm so sorry, Mum. It was an accident. My hand just..." I stammered, already on my knees, gathering the sharp, beautiful pieces. They bit into my skin, drawing tiny beads of blood. A fitting metaphor, I thought bitterly. Everything in this house was sharp and could draw blood. Of course it was. She sighed, a sound laden with the weary disappointment I knew so well. "Just get rid of it, and be careful with the rest of the arrangements. Isabella will be here any minute with the photographer. We don't want any mess, Isabella. The golden child. The bride. My older sister by 18 months. Yet we existed in different solar systems. Where she was sunshine and effortless grace, I was a clumsy satellite, my orbit perpetually slightly off-axis, trailing a cloud of questions and awkward silences. Today, on the eve of her wedding to the impeccably boring but financially flawless Charles, the contrast was to be polished to a high sheen for public consumption. I disposed of the crystal shards, watching the crimson blooms on my fingertips. This was the pattern of my life in the Sinclair family. A series of small, unintentional damages followed by a quiet, efficient cleanup. I was the smudge on the pristine surface of their perfection. The next few hours were a blur of controlled frenzy. I became a ghost in my own home, arranging flowers I was told were too expensive for me to ever afford, directing caterers who looked straight through me, and ensuring the champagne flutes were aligned with military precision. I did it all because it was expected, and because some foolish, stubborn part of me still hoped that if I was helpful enough, quiet enough, perfect enough, I would finally feel the warm, solid ground of belonging beneath my feet. My father, a man carved from oak and stock reports, patted my shoulder absently as he passed, his mind already on his speech, on the merger. No, the marriage his daughter was making. "Everything under control, Alara?" he asked, not really waiting for an answer. "Yes, Dad." "Good girl. Good girl. Not my daughter." The distinction had always been there, a subtle fissure I'd felt since childhood. I'd chalked it up to personality. Isabella was the extrovert, the charmer. I was the bookish, introspective one. It made sense they'd connect with her more easily. But as I grew older, the fissure seemed to deepen into a chasm. Family holidays where I looked nothing like the old photographs in the albums. Jokes about the mailman that stopped being funny when I was 12. The way my mother's embrace always felt like a courtesy, a social obligation she was fulfilling. The front door burst open, and sunlight flooded the dim hall. Isabella stood there, radiant even in jeans and a simple white blouse. She was trailed by a harried-looking photographer. "Darling," my mother cried, her voice transforming, warming by 20 degrees. She swept Isabella into a hug that looked genuinely fierce. Come. Let's get some shots of us with the bride in the garden before the light goes." I stood by the stairs, a spare part, waiting. Isabella's eyes met mine over my mother's shoulder. For a fleeting second, I saw something there. Not sympathy exactly, but a recognition of the absurd theater of it all. She gave me a small private wink. It was our language. She played her part as the golden girl, but she was the only one in this family who ever seemed to truly see me. "Alara, come on," she said, pulling away from our mother. "You have to be in some of these. You're my maid of honor, for heaven's sake." My mother's smile tightened imperceptibly. "Of course she will, darling. But let's get the core family shots first. Just Mum, Dad, and the beautiful bride. Just the core family." The words landed like a physical blow. I felt the air leave my lungs. I was 26 years old, and I was still standing outside the circle. The photographer herded them onto the manicured lawn. I watched from the French windows, a ghost at the feast. They posed, A perfect triptych of wealth, health, and genetic harmony. My father, proud and solid. My mother, elegant and adoring. Isabella, the glorious culmination of their union. They looked like an advertisement for a life I could observe but never inhabit. Later, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and orange, I found myself in my father's study. It was a sanctuary of dark wood and leather, smelling of old books and expensive cigar smoke. I was searching for a specific pen he'd asked for. A heavy Mont Blanc he insisted on using for signing the marriage register. I pulled open the top drawer of his desk. There, nestled beside a stack of pristine legal pads, was a small, worn, leather-bound box I'd never seen before. It was out of place amidst the gloss and order. A cold curiosity trickled down my spine. This was my father's inner sanctum. Everything had its purpose, its place. This box looked secret. I glanced towards the door. The sound of laughter from the garden was distant, muffled. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. This was a violation, I knew. But hadn't I been violated 1,000 times by their subtle exclusions? Didn't I have a right to know why I was always on the outside? With trembling fingers, I lifted the lid. There were no stacks of money, no scandalous love letters, just a few items resting on a bed of faded velvet, a single black and white photograph of a woman I didn't recognize. She was young, maybe in her early 20s, with dark curly hair tumbling around a face that was both fierce and sad. Her eyes, dark and intense, seemed to stare right into me, and in her arms, swaddled in a white blanket, was a baby. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. I picked up the photograph. The woman was beautiful, but there was a roughness to her, a stark contrast to my mother's polished elegance. She looked like she knew how to fight. Beneath the photo was a small, crudely made bracelet, its beads chipped and faded. And tucked into a folded slip of paper at the bottom of the box. I unfolded it carefully. The paper was cheap, lined, the handwriting a looping, unpracticed scrawl. His name is Thomas. He's a good man. He'll give her a good life, a safe life, the life I can't. Her name is Ilara. Don't ever let her forget that she was loved, first and always by me. The world dropped out from under me. The sounds from the garden vanished, replaced by a high-pitched whine in my ears. Ilara. My name. Her name is Ilara. The baby in the photograph was me. The door to the study creaked open. I froze, the note clutched in my hand, a damning confession. My father stood there, his face draining of all color as his eyes moved from my stricken face to the open box on his desk, to the photograph in my hand. The silence in the room was absolute. A physical presence sucking all the air out. The laughter from the garden was a cruel, distant mockery. Ilara, he whispered, his voice hoarse, stripped of all its authority. It was the voice of a man whose carefully constructed world was crumbling. I couldn't speak. I could only hold up the photograph, my hand shaking so violently the image blurred. His shoulders slumped. The oak man was gone, replaced by someone old and terrified. You weren't ever supposed to see that. The words were a confirmation more devastating than any denial. The foundation of my entire life. Every memory, every slight, every moment of not quite belonging, splintered into a million jagged pieces. I wasn't clumsy. I wasn't difficult. I wasn't the wrong shape for their world. I wasn't theirs. I looked at the woman in the photograph, at her dark, desperate eyes. My mother, my real mother, who am I? The question fell from my lips, small and broken. My father, no, Thomas, took a step forward, his hand outstretched in a plea. Ilara, please. You have to understand. We did it to protect you. We love you. You are our daughter, but the words were ash. They were the lies of a man who had hidden a worn leather box in a drawer for 26 years. The cracks in the foundation weren't just cracks anymore. The whole house was falling down, and I was buried in the rubble. The world had not just shifted. It had shattered, and the pieces were sharp, cutting me from the inside out. The photograph felt like a brand in my hand, the face of the dark-haired woman searing itself onto my retinas. Her name is Ilara. The words from the note echoed in the silent, suffocating space between me and the man I had called father for 26 years. Thomas Sinclair stood before me, a stranger. The powerful, confident patriarch was gone, replaced by a man whose carefully constructed facade had just been blown apart. His face was ashen, his eyes wide with a panic I had never seen in him before. He looked at the open box on his desk as if it were a venomous snake. "Alara," he said again, his voice a rasp. "Please put it down. We can talk about this." "Talk?" The word was a choked whisper. I gestured with the photograph, my hand trembling so violently the woman's face seemed to quiver with life. "You want to talk now? After 26 years of lies?" My voice rose, hysteria clawing at its edges. "Who is she?" He flinched, his gaze darting towards the closed door, towards the sounds of the wedding rehearsal that were now a grotesque parody of celebration. "Not here, not now. For God's sake, Ilara, it's Isabella's weekend. Think of your sister. My sister." A bitter, broken laugh escaped me. Is she really my sister? Or is that another lie? The questions tumbled out, each one a hammer blow to the life I thought I knew. Who am I? Where did I come from? He took a step closer, his hand still outstretched, pleading. "You are Ilara Sinclair. You are my daughter. We raised you. We loved you. That is all that matters. It is not all that matters," I cried, the pain finally breaking through the shock, raw and searing. "It matters that I have spent my entire life feeling like a ghost in this house. It matters that I broke a stupid vase today and felt like I'd committed a crime, while Isabella could burn the whole place down and you'd just be worried she'd singed her hair. It matters that I have always known I didn't fit, and I blamed myself for it. I thought it was me." Tears were streaming down my face now, hot and unchecked. I saw the truth of my words hit him. He had never understood the depth of my alienation, had probably never even noticed it. To him, the lie was a closed book. To me, it was the very air I'd been struggling to breathe. "Your mother," he began, and then corrected himself, a slip that felt like a knife to the heart. "Claire, she can't know about this. Not tonight. It would destroy her. It would destroy everything." "Claire," I repeated the name. "My mother. The woman whose embrace had always felt like being hugged by a mannequin." The pieces were slotting into a horrifying new picture. The subtle distance, the lack of physical resemblance, the way her disappointment in me felt less like a mother's frustration and more like a critic's review of a faulty product. She wasn't my mother. She had never been my mother. "We couldn't have children," Thomas said, the words rushing out now as if a dam had broken. He sank into his leather chair, suddenly looking every one of his 60 years. It was as devastating for Claire. Her identity, her social standing, it was all wrapped up in the perfect family. Then a colleague. He knew someone. A young woman. She was in trouble. No family, no resources. She wanted her child to have a better life. A safe life. It was a private adoption. Private? I whispered, the euphemism hanging in the air. It sounded so clean, so legal. But the contents of the box told a different story. The crudely made bracelet. The desperate, looping handwriting. Don't ever let her forget that she was loved, first and always by me. This wasn't a sterile legal transaction. This was a tearing apart. "We brought you home when you were 3 days old," he continued, staring at his hands. "We were your parents from that day on. We gave you everything, except the truth." The words were flat, final. "The truth would have complicated things," he insisted, a flicker of his old authority returning. "It would have confused you. It would have made you question your place here. We did what we thought was best. We protected you. You protected yourselves." I shot back. "You protected your perfect image. The Sinclair family. Thomas, Claire, Isabella, and the adopted one. The charity case. It wouldn't have looked so good in the country club brochures, would it?" He had no answer for that. The silence stretched, thick with the weight of his deception. I looked at the woman in the photograph again. My mother, she had a name, a story. She had loved me. And these people had taken me from her and buried her like a shameful secret. "What was her name?" I asked, my voice quiet but firm. Thomas looked up, his eyes weary. "Ilara, please. What was her name?" I repeated, each word a stone. He sighed, a sound of utter defeat. "Lilith. Her name was Lilith. The name settled in my soul. It fit her. Wild, dark, biblical. A name my proper country club parents would have shuddered at. What happened to her?" "I don't know," he said, and for the first time I believed he was telling the truth. "It was a closed arrangement. We never saw her again. We had a lawyer handle everything. We got the birth certificate, with our names on it. You were ours. The finality in his voice was meant to end the discussion, but for me it was just the beginning. Lilith. My name was her name. Ilara. She had chosen it. It was the only part of her I had left. A sharp rap on the study door made us both jump. Thomas, Ilara? The cars are here to take us to the rehearsal dinner. We can't be late. It was Claire's voice, sharp with impatience. The world, with all its trivial, brutal demands, was crashing back in. We'll be right out, dear, Thomas called, his voice miraculously smoothing into its usual confident baritone. He stood up, straightening his tie. The moment of vulnerability was over. The patriarch was back in control. He looked at me, his eyes hard. Ilara, listen to me. We will discuss this later. But for now, you will compose yourself. You will go to this dinner. You will smile. You will be happy for your sister. We are a family, and we will present a united front. Do you understand me? It was an order. The same tone he used with junior executives he was about to fire. The shock began to recede, replaced by a cold, clear fury. The numbness was burning away, leaving behind a core of solid, glacial anger. They had stolen my history. They had let me feel like an outsider in my own life. And now, he was commanding me to play my part in their charade one more time. I looked at the photograph of Lilith one last time, committing her face to memory. Then I carefully placed it back in the box, closed the lid, and slid the drawer shut. I wiped the tears from my face with the back of my hand, my fingers coming away smudged with black mascara. Ilara? Thomas prompted, his voice a warning. I met his gaze. The hurt, confused girl was gone. In her place was a woman who had just discovered she was built on a foundation of lies, and was therefore free to build herself anew. I understand perfectly, I said, my voice eerily calm. I walked out of the study, past my mother, who gave my disheveled appearance a disapproving once-over, and out into the cool evening air. The limousine waited, a long black coffin for my old life. I slid inside, the leather seat cold against my skin. Isabella was already there, glowing with excitement. There you are! I was about to send a search party. God, I'm so nervous. Are you okay? You look pale. She reached out and took my hand. Her touch, which would have been a comfort just an hour ago, now felt alien. She was not my sister. She was the biological daughter of Thomas and Claire Sinclair. She was the legitimate heir. I was the cuckoo in the nest, the imposter. I'm fine, I lied, forcing a smile that felt like a crack in glass. Just pre-wedding jitters? For you. She squeezed my hand, her smile radiant and trusting. You're the best sister in the world. The words were a fresh wound. As the car pulled away from the House of Lies, I looked out the window at the passing streets. Somewhere out there was a woman named Lilith, a woman who had loved me, a woman they had erased. The rehearsal dinner was a blur of clinking glasses, forced laughter, and speeches full of hollow sentiments about the unbreakable bonds of family. I sat through it all, a smile plastered on my face, a screaming silence in my heart. I watched Thomas and Claire, the perfect couple, the doting parents, and saw them for what they were, consummate actors in a play they had written and directed. And I saw my role with devastating clarity. I was the supporting character, the walk-on part whose purpose was to make the leads look better. But the script had just been torn up. Tomorrow was the wedding. The day when the Sinclair family would present its perfect face to the world one more time. They needed everything to be flawless, but I was no longer interested in being part of their perfection. I was Lilith's daughter, and it was time to start acting like it. The rehearsal dinner was the exquisite form of torture. Every clink of fine china was a hammer on the anvil of my new reality. Every burst of laughter felt like a personal mockery. I sat at the long, linen-draped table in the private room of the country club, a ghost wearing the skin of Ilara Sinclair. I was trapped inside the diorama of a life that had never been mine. To my left, Isabella glowed, her hand often finding that of her fiancé, Charles. Their happiness was a palpable, warm force, and a part of me, the part that was still her sister, ached for her. This was her moment, and the cataclysm in my soul threatened to cast a shadow over it. But the larger part of me, the part that was now Lilith's daughter, was screaming in silent, trapped fury. Across from me, Thomas and Claire held court. I watched them now with the cold, analytical eye of a stranger. Thomas's laughter was too loud, his gestures slightly too broad, a man overcompensating for the fault line that had just opened beneath his feet. His eyes would occasionally flick to me, a quick, nervous glance before skittering away. He was waiting for me to detonate, to stand on the table and scream the truth to this room full of their polished, moneyed friends. Claire, however, was a masterpiece of oblivious composure. She sipped her wine, she laughed at the appropriate moments, she leaned in to listen to an elderly aunt with a show of rapt attention. There was no crack in her facade. She had no idea that the foundation of her perfect world had been gutted just hours before. She saw my quietness, my pale face, and I watched her diagnose it as a typical Alara episode. Awkwardness, perhaps a touch of envy. The irony was so thick I could taste it, metallic and bitter. Like blood, and of course, Thomas was saying, rising to his feet and tapping his knife against his glass, we couldn't be more thrilled to welcome Charles into our family. He's the son we never had. The room erupted in warm, approving laughter. I felt the words like a physical blow. The son we never had. But they'd had a daughter they never wanted. A daughter they'd acquired. The hypocrisy was suffocating. To Charles and Isabella, Thomas boomed, raising his glass. To the unbreakable bond of family. To family! The room chorused. I lifted my glass, my smile a rictus of pain. My eyes met Thomas's over the rim. For a fraction of a second, the mask slipped, and I saw the raw fear in his eyes. He knew I wasn't toasting. I was bearing witness. The moment passed. The speeches continued. Charles's father spoke of legacy. A friend of Isabella's told an embarrassing childhood story that had everyone cooing. Through it all, I sat perfectly still, a dormant volcano in a maid-of-honor dress. Isabella, sensing my distance, leaned in. "You're being so quiet. Are you sure you're okay?" she whispered, her brow furrowed with genuine concern. "You haven't touched your salmon." I looked at her, my sister. Was she? The genetics said no, but 26 years of shared history, of whispered secrets in the dark, of solidarity against parental dictates, of a love that had always felt real. That had to count for something, didn't it? Or was it all built on the same lie? "Just a bit of a headache," I murmured, patting her hand. The lie came easily, coded in a lifetime of practice of hiding my true feelings in this family. "It's all just..." "A lot," her face softened. "I know. But tomorrow it'll be just us again." "Well, us and Charles," she added with a giggle. "Just us." The words had meant everything yesterday. Today they were empty. When the dinner finally, mercifully ended, we were swept back into the fleet of waiting cars. The ride home was silent. Isabella and Charles were wrapped in their own blissful bubble in one car. I rode with Thomas and Claire. The silence in our car was a thick, toxic fog. Claire scrolled through photos on her phone, making satisfied little hums. "The photographer got some lovely shots in the garden today. The light was just perfect. We'll have to get a large canvas for the drawing room." Thomas grunted in response, staring fixedly out the window. "Alara, you looked a bit peaky in most of them," Claire continued, not looking up from her screen. "I'll have him Photoshop a bit of color into your cheeks. We can't have you looking ill on your sister's wedding day." There it was. The cleanup, the erasure. My genuine distress was just another flaw to be digitally airbrushed away, another smudge on the perfect picture. "Thank you, Mother," I said, the title ash in my mouth. That would be perfect. We arrived home. The house, usually a place of oppressive order, now felt like a crime scene. Claire went straight upstairs, calling out a breezy, "Big day tomorrow! Don't stay up too late," before disappearing. The moment her footsteps faded, the atmosphere in the grand foyer turned arctic. Thomas turned to me, his face grim. "My study." "Now," he commanded, his voice low and tight. I followed him, my heart a cold, hard stone in my chest. He closed the door behind us with a soft, final click. He didn't go to his desk. Instead, he stood before the cold fireplace, his back to me for a moment, gathering himself. "What do you want, Alara?" he asked, his voice weary, all the dinner party bluster gone. The question was so blunt, so transactional, it stole my breath for a second. "Not I'm sorry. Not let me explain. What do you want?" "The truth," I said, my voice steady. "All of it." He turned around, his hands shoved in his pockets. You have the truth. Your biological mother was a young woman named Lilith who couldn't care for you. We did. End of story. It's not the end of the story. I shot back, my composure cracking. Who was she? Where was she from? Why couldn't she care for me? Was it money? Was she sick? Did you even care? It was a private arrangement, he insisted, a flash of anger in his eyes. Discretion was paramount. For everyone's sake, especially yours. Don't you dare use me as your excuse, I hissed, stepping closer. You did it for you. For her? I gestured upstairs towards Claire. To maintain the perfect Sinclair image. You bought a baby because it was tidier than admitting you couldn't have one. You didn't want an adoption. You wanted an acquisition. His face flushed a deep mottled red. You will not speak about your mother that way. She is not my mother. The words erupted from me. A raw, primal scream that had been building for 26 years. My mother's name was Lilith, and you locked her away in a box like she was something shameful. The silence that followed was ringing. We stood there, two adversaries, the pretense of father and daughter gone, incinerated in the heat of the truth. What are you going to do? He asked quietly, and in that question, I heard the death of his authority over me. He was no longer commanding. He was negotiating. I looked at him. This man who had taught me to ride a bike, who had paid for my education, who had given me a name that wasn't mine. A tidal wave of conflicting emotions, love, betrayal, pity, rage, threatened to pull me under. But the rage won. I don't know, I said. And it was the truth. The world was still spinning too fast. But I know this. The lie ends now. I will not stand beside you tomorrow and pretend we are a family. Panic flared in his eyes. Alara, you are the maid of honor. Isabella is your daughter, I interrupted, the words clean and sharp. I am Lilith's. You made that distinction my entire life. Now I'm just agreeing with you. I walked to the door, my legs feeling like they belonged to someone else. I had no plan, only a bottomless well of pain and a determination not to be their puppet any longer. Alara, wait, he called out, his voice stripped bare. Please, let's talk about this like adults. We can work something out. I stopped, my hand on the doorknob, but I didn't turn around. I couldn't look at him. What could you possibly offer me, Thomas? I asked, using his name for the first time. It felt foreign and powerful on my tongue. More money? A better car? A trust fund? You've given me everything money can buy. But you stole the one thing that was priceless. You stole my mother. I opened the door and walked out, leaving him standing alone in the ruins of his own making. I didn't go to my room. I went outside into the cool, dark garden and looked up at the vast, indifferent sky. Somewhere up there, maybe, Lilith was looking at the same stars. My name is Alara, I whispered to the night, the name feeling truly like my own for the first time. And my mother's name was Lilith. It was the only truth I had, but I would cling to it like a life raft in the storm that was yet to come. The wedding was tomorrow, and I would be there, but I would no longer be playing the part of Alara Sinclair, the dutiful daughter. I would be there as Lilith's daughter, and I had no idea what that would mean. The morning of the wedding dawned with a cruel, pristine clarity. Sunlight streamed into my bedroom, painting golden bars on the floor. From downstairs, the house hummed with a different energy than the day before. Sharper, more focused, a machine fine-tuning itself for a single, flawless performance. I lay in bed, the events of the previous evening not a dream but a weight on my chest, solid and immovable. I was an imposter in my own skin. The reflection that stared back from my bathroom mirror was a stranger's. The same hazel eyes, the same sweep of brown hair, but the person behind them was fundamentally altered. I was no longer the flawed Sinclair daughter. I was Alara, daughter of Lilith, a woman with a ghost for a mother and a past built on quicksand. A soft knock came at the door. Alara, the hairdresser and makeup artist are here. Can they come in? It was Claire, my mother. A cold wave of nausea washed over me. How could I face her? How could I let her touch me, fuss over me, play the role of the doting mother of the bride? And the maid of honor? The hypocrisy was a physical presence in the room, suffocating and vile. Just a minute, I called, my voice miraculously steady. I splashed cold water on my face, the shock of it grounding me. Lilith. I held on to the name like a talisman. My name is Alara. My mother's name was Lilith. I opened the door. Claire stood there, already in her silk dressing gown, her own makeup artist trailing behind her. She gave me a brisk, appraising look. You look tired. Still have that headache? Not to worry. Sophia's a miracle worker. She'll fix you right up. She swept into the room, followed by a smiling, efficient-looking woman carrying a large case of cosmetics. There was no warmth in her assessment, only the clinical evaluation of a project manager assessing a problem that needed to be solved before a major presentation. I was the problem. For the next 2 hours, I was poked, primped, and polished. My hair was curled and pinned into an elaborate, soft updo. My face was layered with foundation, my eyes smudged with tasteful shadow. My lips painted a pale, glossy pink. Sophia chattered away, oblivious to the tectonic shifts happening beneath the surface of her subject. Claire drifted in and out, offering critiques and adjustments. A little more blush, Sophia. She's still so pale. That curl isn't quite right. Can you pin it back like Isabella's? Remember, the photographer will be here at noon. We need to be ready. I sat through it all, a mannequin. I let them turn me into the perfect accessory for the perfect wedding. With every brush stroke, every pin, I felt myself being buried deeper. The new, raw me being sealed under a veneer of Sinclair-approved perfection. Finally, they were done. Sophia packed her things and left with a cheerful, "You look beautiful." Claire stood back, her head tilted, a satisfied smile on her perfectly curated face. "Lovely," she declared. "Just lovely. Now don't touch anything. I'll send Isabella in. She needs help with her dress." She left, and a moment later, Isabella floated in, a vision in a white silk robe, her face alight with a nervous, radiant joy. Her own hair and makeup were complete, and she looked like a goddess stepped down from a fresco. "Oh, Alara," she breathed, her eyes welling up. "You look so beautiful." The genuine love in her voice was a shard of glass in my heart. She saw her sister, her confidant, her maid of honor. She had no idea she was looking at a stranger. "So do you," I managed, my throat tight. "I'm so nervous," she chattered, turning her back to me. "Help me with the buttons? Mum said it's bad luck for her to do it." My hands trembled as I began to fasten the tiny pearl-covered buttons that ran the length of the exquisite lace wedding gown. Each one was a struggle. My fingers, which had felt so clumsy with my mother's vase, now felt clumsy with the weight of my betrayal. I was helping to dress my sister for her wedding, all while knowing I was about to detonate a bomb that would shatter her world. "Is everything okay with you and Dad?" she asked softly, her voice muffled by the fabric. I froze, my fingers on a button halfway down her back. "What do you mean? You both seemed so tense last night after dinner. And you've been quiet." She turned her head, trying to look at me. "Did you have a fight?" The opportunity was there. I could have told her everything right then. Unburdened myself, but I looked at her face, so full of hope and happiness, so blissfully unaware of the rot at the core of our family. I couldn't do it. Not here. Not now, minutes before she was to walk down the aisle. Just pre-wedding stress, I lied, my voice thick. For both of us. He wants everything to be perfect for you. She relaxed, turning back. "I know. He's a softie underneath it all." She let out a shaky sigh. "I'm so glad you're here with me, Elle. I couldn't do this without you." The final button was fastened. I had sealed her into her fairy tale. I had also, I felt, sealed my own fate. She turned around and hugged me tightly. "I love you, sister." I held her, my arms like lead. "I love you too, Bella," I whispered. And I meant it. That was the cruelest part. The love was real, even if the foundation was false. The photographer arrived then, and the next hour was a whirlwind of more pictures. The bride with the parents. The bride with the bridesmaids. The bride with her sister. I smiled. I laughed on cue. I posed with my arm around Claire, my hand on Thomas's shoulder. We were a masterpiece of familial bliss. Thomas avoided my eyes, his smile strained. He was a man walking a tightrope, and I was the one holding the shears. Finally, it was time. The cars were waiting to take us to the cathedral. The atmosphere in the limousine was electric with Isabella's nervous excitement. Claire held her hand. offering last-minute advice on posture and poise. Thomas stared out the window, a muscle twitching in his jaw. I sat opposite them, my hands folded neatly in my lap, clad in the dusky rose silk of the maid of honor dress. Inside, I was a chaos of conflicting impulses. Run, scream, confess, stay silent. Protect Isabella, avenge Lilith. We arrived at the cathedral. It was a magnificent ancient stone building, its spire piercing the bright blue sky. The guests were already inside. We could hear the muffled murmur of the crowd through the heavy oak doors. We were ushered into a small wood-paneled anteroom. The scent of old incense and beeswax filled the air. The organist began to play the prelude, the deep, resonant notes vibrating through the stone floor. "Okay," Claire said, adjusting Isabella's veil with trembling, proud hands. "This is it." "My beautiful girl." Isabella looked at me, her eyes wide. "Ilara, my bouquet?" I handed her the heavy cascade of white roses and peonies. Our eyes met. In that moment, the world narrowed to just the two of us. The sisters. The allies. "You're going to be amazing," I told her. And for that 1 second, it was the only truth in the universe. The wedding coordinator, a brisk woman with a headset, opened the door a crack. "The bridesmaids are starting. Maid of honor, you're up." This was it. The point of no return. I took a deep breath, my gaze sweeping over the three of them, Thomas, Claire, and Isabella. The Sinclair family. They stood together, a perfect, closed unit. I turned and walked out into the cool dimness of the vestibule. The music swelled. The massive doors to the nave were open. I could see the sea of guests, all turned, watching. I could see the altar, and Charles standing there, waiting. My heart was a wild drum against my ribs. Every step I took down the long, endless aisle felt like a step towards my own execution. The faces of friends, relatives, society figures blurred into a smear of pastel colors and expectant smiles. They saw a woman in a beautiful dress, fulfilling her role. They had no idea they were watching a ghost walk. I reached the front, took my place to the left of the altar, and turned to face the door. The music changed, soaring into the triumphant notes of the bridal chorus. A collective gasp rippled through the cathedral as Isabella appeared on Thomas's arm, breathtakingly beautiful, a vision of pure joy. And in that moment, as I watched the man I called my father prepare to give away his real daughter, a cold, terrifying certainty settled over me. The lie couldn't hold. It was too big, too rotten. It was a cancer, and I was the only one who knew it was there. They thought this was a celebration of family. For me, it was the beginning of a reckoning. The ceremony was a beautiful, slow-motion dream, and I was trapped in its gauzy, perfumed heart. Every word of the vicar, every tremulous smile from Isabella, every proud tear dabbed from Claire's eye, was a fresh incision. I stood at my post, my hands clasped so tightly the bones ached, a fixed, serene smile plastered on my face. Sophia's masterpiece, holding firm. I watched Thomas give Isabella away. I watched him place her hand in Charles's, his own grip firm, his expression the very picture of a father's bittersweet joy. He did not look at me. He didn't dare. I was the unexploded bomb in the front pew. When it came time for the vows, Isabella's voice was clear and sure, ringing through the hushed cathedral. "I, Isabella, take you, Charles, to be my husband." The words echoed, twisting in my mind. I, Isabella. A person with a known origin, a documented history, a right to her own name. What would my vows sound like if I ever made them? I, Ilara. But who was Ilara? A name given by a ghost, appropriated by liars. My eyes scanned the crowd. They were all here, the whole of our world. The partners from my father's firm, their wives adorned in jewels that could have fed a family for a year. My mother's charity committee, their faces soft with sentimental approval. Distant cousins, old school friends, they all saw what they were meant to see, a fairy tale. And I saw the scaffolding holding it up, rotten and termite-ridden. The vicar pronounced them man and wife. Charles kissed his bride. The organ erupted in a jubilant recessional. The congregation rose to its feet, beaming, as the new Mr. and Mrs. Charles Henderson began their triumphant walk back down the aisle. My part was almost over. Just the photographs, the reception, the speeches. The speeches. A fresh wave of cold dread washed over me. Thomas would give a speech, the father of the bride, full of anecdotes about his little girl, about the unbreakable Sinclair bond. He would look at me, sitting there at the top table, and he would include me in his gaze, a gracious, public inclusion that would be just another lie. We were herded outside onto the cathedral steps for the official photographs. The summer sun was warm on my bare shoulders, a stark contrast to the ice in my veins. We arranged ourselves into tableau of happiness. The bride and groom with the parents, the entire wedding party. Okay, and now just the immediate family, the photographer called out, gesturing. Parents with both daughters. My breath hitched. This was it. The moment to solidify the lie in high-resolution digital format. Thomas and Claire moved to flank Isabella. Claire, beaming, reached out an arm to pull me into the frame. Her hand on my arm felt like a brand. I stood stiffly on the end, a bookend to their perfect family portrait. Lovely. Everyone smile, the photographer chirped, his face buried in his camera. Thomas's smile was a grimace. Claire's was radiant. Isabella's was incandescent. I felt my own lips stretch, a death mask rictus. Okay, great. Now just the core family. Bride and groom with the parents. The dismissal was as casual as a breath. The photographer, following a pre-approved shot list, probably provided by Claire, had no idea he was wielding a scalpel. Just the core family. The words from the day before, now given a public photographic permanence. Thomas flinched almost imperceptibly. Claire's smile didn't falter as she gently nudged me out of the way. Her focus already returned to Isabella. I stepped back, the space where I had been standing feeling suddenly vast and empty. I was on the periphery again, watching the real family pose without the awkward, adopted addition. The message was clear, even if it was unintentional. I was not core. I was an add-on, an accessory. The cold fury that had been simmering inside me since I found the box began to boil over. The numbness was gone, burned away by a white-hot sense of injustice. They had erased my mother. They had made me a supporting character in my own life. And now, on this most public of stages, they were quietly, politely, editing me out of the picture. Isabella, sensing my withdrawal, glanced over. "Alara, come on, squeeze in," she called, her voice light. "It's fine, Bella," I said, my voice miraculously steady. "This is for the mantelpiece. You and Mum and Dad." I saw the confusion flicker in her eyes, but she was swept up in the moment, turning back to the camera as Claire adjusted a stray curl of her hair. I turned and walked a few paces away, pretending to fix the strap of my shoe, using the moment to breathe, to contain the storm. I looked out over the manicured church grounds, at the laughing guests sipping champagne, at my family posing without me. This was their truth, a truth that excluded me. The photographic session ended, and we were funneled back into the cars for the short drive to the reception venue, a grand, opulent hotel ballroom that Claire had spent a year planning. The air inside was thick with the scent of thousands of white roses and the buzz of expensive conversation. I moved through the crowd on autopilot, accepting compliments, smiling, nodding. I was a ghost at the feast, observing the rituals of a tribe I no longer belonged to. I saw Thomas working the room, his laugh too loud, his backslapping too hearty. He was a man trying to outrun his own dread. Then it was time for dinner. We took our seats at the top table, raised on a dais overlooking the sea of guests. I was seated between Charles's blandly pleasant brother and Isabella. Directly across from me were Thomas and Claire. The first courses were served. Speeches would come after the main course. I picked at my food, the delicate flavors turning to ash in my mouth. My pulse was a frantic drumbeat in my ears. Every minute that passed was a minute closer to Thomas standing up, raising his glass, and telling his beautiful lies to a rapt audience. I could feel his anxious gaze on me throughout the meal. He was trying to read me, to gauge my intentions. I gave him nothing. I was a closed book, written in a language he could no longer understand. Finally, the plates were cleared. The master of ceremonies, a friend of Charles's, tapped his microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention, please. It is now time for the speeches. First up, to toast the beautiful bride, her father, Thomas Sinclair." Polite, expectant applause filled the room. Thomas stood, adjusting his tie, a sheen of sweat visible on his forehead under the bright lights. He picked up his glass and a stack of index cards, his speech, no doubt vetted and approved by Claire. He looked out at the smiling, attentive faces, then his eyes swept across the top table, lingering for a terrified second on me before settling on Isabella. "Friends, family, thank you for being here on this most joyous of days," he began, his voice a little unsteady. He cleared his throat. "Isabella, from the moment you were born, you lit up our lives." He spoke of her childhood, her first steps, her graduation. Each anecdote was a brick in the wall of the Sinclair family narrative. A narrative from which I was conspicuously absent. He spoke of our daughter, of the love of a mother and father, of the family we built. With every word, the box in the study felt more present, the photograph of Lilith burning a hole in my consciousness. Don't ever let her forget that she was loved, first and always by me. Thomas was building his perfect monument, and he was using the rubble of my true history to do it. He was nearing the end. And so it gives me the greatest pleasure to see the woman you have become. A woman any parent would be proud to call their daughter. His eyes flicked to me again. A desperate, fleeting glance. We are so blessed. Claire and I, we have been blessed with 2 wonderful daughters. It was a throwaway line, a bone tossed to the awkward non-core daughter at the end of the table. A public attempt at inclusion that was too little, 26 years too late. He raised his glass. "To Isabella, our beautiful bride, and to Charles." "To Isabella and Charles," the room roared back. As the applause died down and Thomas moved to sit, a strange, powerful calm descended upon me. The chaos inside coalesced into a single, clear purpose. The time for silence was over. Before he could reach his seat, before the MC could introduce the next speaker, I stood up. The movement was quiet, but on the raised dais, it was as conspicuous as a gunshot. A ripple of confusion went through the crowd. Chairs creaked as people turned. Thomas froze, half standing, half sitting, his face a mask of pure horror. Claire's smile had vanished, replaced by a look of bewildered irritation. I picked up my own champagne flute. The crystal was cool and smooth in my hand. I did not look at Thomas or Claire. I looked at Isabella, whose face was a question mark. Then, I turned to face the room full of guests, my heart pounding not with fear but with a terrible, liberating certainty. "If I may," I said, my voice clear and carrying, cutting through the murmur of confusion. "I'd like to propose a toast of my own." A silence, sharp and total, fell over the ballroom. It was a vacuum, sucking the sound from the air, leaving only the frantic beating of my own heart as a drum in my ears. Hundreds of faces, a sea of confused, expectant, and now slightly concerned expressions, were turned towards me. On the dais, the tableau was frozen. Thomas was a statue of pure panic, his hand still gripping the back of his chair. Claire's face had tightened into a mask of frozen fury, her eyes screaming silent warnings at me. But it was Isabella's face I felt most acutely, a wide-eyed, bewildered hurt, the first cracks appearing in her perfect day. I held the champagne flute, the bubbles inside seeming as agitated as the atmosphere. This was the precipice. There was no going back. "Forgive the interruption," I began, my voice surprisingly steady, a calm lake over a turbulent depth. But my father's beautiful speech, it moved me. It got me thinking about family. I paused, letting the word hang in the air. About what it truly means. I could see the relief momentarily flood Thomas's features. He thought I was going to play my part, to give a gushing, sentimental maid-of-honor speech. He gave a small, nervous nod of encouragement. I did not nod back. He spoke of the moment Isabella was born. I continued, my gaze sweeping the room. The light she brought. I know that light. She's my sister, and her joy has been a beacon in my life. I looked at Isabella, wanting her to feel the genuine truth in that, a truth that existed outside of all the lies. Her expression softened slightly, a tentative smile touching her lips. Then I turned my gaze to Thomas. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees, but he also spoke of being blessed with 2 wonderful daughters. I let the statement sit, heavy and loaded. And that is a more complicated blessing, isn't it? The confusion in the room deepened. I saw exchanged glances, raised eyebrows. You see? I said, and now my voice took on a harder edge, the calm giving way to the raw truth beneath. For 26 years, I have believed I was one of those two daughters. I believed I was Alara Sinclair. I believed the distance I sometimes felt, the subtle ways I never quite seemed to fit the family mold, was a flaw in me, a lack in my character. Alara, Thomas whispered, the word a desperate plea, but it was lost in the vast, silent room. I thought I was clumsy. I thought I was too quiet, too bookish, too different. I took a step forward, towards the edge of the dais, holding the crowd in the palm of my hand. I spent a lifetime trying to shrink myself into a space I was never meant to occupy, trying to earn a place that I believed was my birthright. I looked directly at Claire, whose face was now bone white. I broke a vase yesterday, a family heirloom, and I felt such a profound sense of failure, such a shame, because I had damaged a piece of this perfect family's history. I could feel the narrative shifting. This was no longer a toast. It was a confession, a reckoning. But yesterday, I said, my voice dropping, compelling them to lean in, I discovered that the vase wasn't the only thing in that house that was broken. The foundation was rotten. I found a box, a small, leather-bound box hidden away in my father's study. Thomas made a strangled sound. Claire's hand flew to her throat. In it, I continued, the memory fueling my resolve, was a photograph of a young woman I had never seen. She had dark curly hair and eyes that held a world of sadness and strength. And she was holding a baby. My voice broke, just a little, on the last word. I took a steadying breath. There was a note. It said, "Her name is Alara. Don't ever let her forget that she was loved, first and always, by me." A collective, sharp intake of breath hissed through the ballroom. The sound was like a wave crashing against a shore. I saw hands fly to mouths. I saw eyes widen in dawning horror and fascination. Her name, I repeated, the words ringing with a newfound power, was Lilith. I let the name hang there, a stark, beautiful alien sound in the opulent room. Lilith, not Claire, not Sinclair. Thomas and Claire Sinclair are not my parents. The statement was clean, surgical, and it cut through the last of the pretense. They adopted me in a private arrangement. They took me from a woman named Lilith, who loved me enough to want a better life for me, and they brought me here. They gave me a name she had chosen, a life of privilege, and a family history that was a fabrication. They raised me as their own, but they never let me forget, in 1,000 subtle ways, that I was not core family. They let me believe the fault was mine. The silence was now absolute, profound. You could have heard a petal drop from one of the thousands of roses. I turned to Thomas and Claire. The horror on their faces was complete. Their perfect world, so carefully curated over decades, was being dismantled before the eyes of everyone they knew. "You told me you did it to protect me," I said to them directly, my voice trembling with a mix of fury and devastating grief. "But you were protecting yourselves. Your image, your perfect Sinclair story. You erased my mother. You buried her in a box like a shameful secret. And you made me a living, breathing monument to your lie." I finally turned back to the stunned audience. I saw pity. I saw shock. I saw judgment. I didn't care. "So," I said, raising my glass high. The champagne shimmered, a liquid sun in the bright lights. "I would like to propose a toast. Not to the family I was told I had, but to the one I was stolen from. To the woman who gave me my name, and who, according to her last wish, loved me first and always." My voice grew stronger, filled with a painful, proud certainty. "To Lilith, my mother." I did not wait for a response. I did not look to see if anyone raised their glass. I brought the flute to my lips and drank, the champagne tasting bitter and triumphant. Then I placed the empty glass on the table with a soft, definitive click. The spell was broken. The room erupted into a cacophony of gasps, murmurs, and outright exclamations. Chairs scraped. Cameras flashed. Some guest, forgetting all decorum, was documenting the meltdown. I looked at Isabella. The hurt in her eyes had been replaced by a storm of confusion and betrayal. "Alara, what have you done?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the growing din. I had no answer for her. I had done what I had to do. I turned and walked away from the top table. I moved through the crowd, which parted for me like the Red Sea, their stares hot on my skin. I didn't look back. I walked out of the ballroom, leaving behind the ruins of the wedding, the ruins of my old life, and the devastating, necessary truth hanging in the air like smoke. The heavy ballroom doors swung shut behind me, muffling the rising tide of scandalized voices into a distant, chaotic hum. I stood alone in the vast, marbled emptiness of the hotel foyer, the silence of physical shock after the emotional detonation I had just caused. My legs felt boneless, my entire body trembling with the aftershocks. I leaned against a cool, polished pillar, sucking in ragged gasps of air that smelled of floor wax and dying flowers. It was done. There was no triumphant surge of victory, only a hollow, aching exhaustion. I had torn down my entire world with a few carefully chosen words. I had exposed the Sinclairs' most guarded secret, and in doing so, had publicly flayed myself open. The image of Isabella's face, a mask of shattered confusion, was seared behind my eyelids. The memory of Thomas's ashen horror, of Claire's frozen, furious stare would haunt me forever. I had wanted the truth. Now I had to live in its devastating aftermath. A part of me, the little girl who had always craved their approval, screamed in terror at what I had done. That part wanted to run back in, to try and somehow glue the pieces back together, to apologize for ruining the perfect day. But the woman I had become, Lilith's daughter, stood her ground. The truth, once spoken, could not be unspoken. It existed now, in the world, an entity separate from me. The ballroom doors burst open. I flinched, expecting Thomas, security, a torrent of outrage. It was Isabella. Her veil was askew, her mascara smudged in dark tear-tracked rivers down her cheeks. The beautiful, radiant bride was gone, replaced by a heartbroken stranger. She stalked towards me, her wedding dress rustling like a vengeful ghost. How could you? The words were a raw, guttural sob. How could you do that to me? To us, on my wedding day. Bella, I began, my voice thin and wrecked. It wasn't about you. It was about the lie we've all been living. Don't you dare, she shrieked, stopping a few feet from me, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Don't you dare make this about you. This was my day. Everything was perfect, and you just obliterated it. For what? For some ancient history? It's not ancient history to me. I fired back, the numbness giving way to a fresh wave of pain. It's my life. My identity. I spent 26 years feeling like I didn't belong, and they knew why. They knew the whole time, and they let me believe it was my fault. So what? She cried, her voice cracking. So what if you're adopted? They loved you. They raised you! They gave you everything. Was that not enough? Did you have to destroy our family to feel special? Her words were arrows, each one finding its mark. This was the perspective I had been too blinded by my own pain to fully consider. To her, the biology was irrelevant. The family was the one she had lived in, the one she had loved. I had not just exposed our parents. I had betrayed her. They lied to you too, Bella, I said, pleading now. They let you believe we were the same. We are the same, she insisted, tears streaming freely. You're my sister. Nothing in that stupid box changes that. But what you did in there, that changes everything. The finality in her voice was a door slamming shut. I saw it then, the chasm that had opened between us, wider and deeper than any genetic difference could ever create. I had chosen my truth over her happiness. There was no coming back from that. Just then, Thomas emerged from the ballroom. He looked decades older, his shoulders slumped, his eyes hollow. He didn't look at me with anger anymore, only with a profound, weary defeat. Isabella, he said, his voice gravelly. Charles is looking for you. The guests. We need to try and salvage. He couldn't even finish the sentence. Salvage. As if the wedding was a shipwreck. Isabella shot me one last, scorching look of betrayal before turning and fleeing back into the ballroom, the train of her dress a white flag of surrender. Thomas and I were alone. The silence stretched, thick and painful. Was it worth it? He finally asked, not looking at me, but staring at a pointless abstract painting on the vast wall. To humiliate us like that? To destroy your sister's joy? You humiliated me every day you kept that secret, I whispered. You destroyed my sense of self long before I ever touched a microphone. He nodded slowly, as if accepting a verdict. Your mother, Claire, She won't recover from this. The shame. Her name is Lilith, I said, the name my only shield, and her only shame was having to give me up. He finally turned to look at me, and in his eyes, I saw the ghost of the man I had once adored. We did love you, Alara, in our way. We didn't know how to love you and the truth at the same time. It was the closest I would ever get to an apology, and it changed nothing. I can't go back in there, I said, stating the obvious. No, he agreed, his voice flat. You can't. He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out his checkbook and a pen. He didn't speak as he wrote, tore out the check and held it out to me. It was a significant amount, a severance package, a payment for my silence after the fact, a final transaction. I looked at the piece of paper fluttering in his trembling hand. It represented everything my life with them had been. A problem that could be solved with money. I didn't take it. Goodbye? Thomas, I said. I turned and walked away, across the vast empty foyer, towards the grand entrance. I pushed through the heavy glass doors and stepped out into the late afternoon sun. The world outside was going on as if nothing had happened. Cars passed, people laughed, life continued. I stood on the steps of the hotel, the discarded, disowned daughter, with nothing to my name but the clothes on my back and a truth that had cost me everything. But as I took my first step down, towards the uncertain future, a strange feeling began to bloom in the hollow space where my family had been. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't peace. It was something more fundamental. It was the feeling of solid ground. For the first time in 26 years, I was not standing on a lie. The foundation was gone, yes, but the earth beneath my feet was real. It was mine. I was Alara, daughter of Lilith. I had no money, no home, no plan. But I had a name that was truly mine, and a story that was no longer hidden. I started walking, away from the hotel, away from the Sinclairs, away from the ghost of the girl I used to be. The path ahead was dark and unknown, but for the first time, I was the one holding the lantern. I was no longer an imposter in my own life. I was simply myself. Broken, yes. Alone, certainly. But I was free, and in that freedom, there was a terrifying, magnificent beginning.